The corridor. What if the one moment you were most desperate to hide became the moment that changed everything? She wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to see her. And yet, when fate strips away every carefully built wall in a single heartbeat, sometimes the most devastating truth is the one you've been running from your whole life. This is the story of Sienna Cavalieri, a woman suffocating beneath a name that owns her, and Christian Rossi, the one man in the world sworn never to want her. But oaths crumble. And some fires, no matter how carefully you guard them, burn anyway. Stay with me. Because this isn't just a love story. This is a reckoning. Sienna Cavalieri is everything her father designed her to be. Graceful, educated, beautiful, a living, breathing crown jewel of the most powerful crime family in the city. She speaks 4 languages, holds a business degree, and smiles with practiced warmth at men she despises. But behind those careful eyes lives a woman who is quietly, desperately suffocating. Christian Rossi is the youngest don in the city's history, a man who built his empire on iron control, unshakable loyalty, and one sacred rule above all others. Sienna Cavalieri is untouchable. An agreement between their fathers. A promise carved in stone. For 5 years, Christian has kept that promise perfectly. Tonight, that changes. Open book, the story begins. The panic attack didn't announce itself. It never does. It arrived in the middle of 300 guests, designer gowns, and enough diamonds to ransom a small nation, and it arrived with a single, suffocating truth. Sienna's father had just announced her engagement to Luca Ferrara. Not asked. Announced. Like she was a contract being signed, not a daughter being loved. She escaped the ballroom with muscle memory guiding her feet, through the private wing, past the security guards who knew better than to question her, down the marble corridor to the spa room her mother had installed the previous year. Temperature-controlled pool. Steam room. Complete. Blessed silence. The dress came off with shaking hands. The corset, 4 hours of crushed ribs and manufactured posture, dropped to the floor. And Sienna sank into the heated water, utterly bare, because when you cannot breathe and your entire carefully constructed life is imploding, modesty feels like a luxury you cannot afford. She floated. She practiced her therapist's breathing techniques. In for 4. Hold for 7. Out for 8. And slowly, incrementally, the panic receded, replaced by the quiet, burning anger that lived in her bones whenever she thought of Luca's smug expression when her father made the announcement. Like he'd already won something she hadn't agreed to give. 20 minutes in the pool. 15 more in the steam room. Long enough to feel human again. Long enough to rebuild her armor. She walked out of the steam room confident, composed, ready to return to the masquerade. She made it exactly 3 steps. Christian Rossi stood at the far end of the marble corridor. 30 feet of Italian stone between them. Him frozen mid-step. Her, completely, catastrophically naked. Time stopped. The world narrowed to this one impossible scene. Her, exposed and flushed from steam. Him, staring with eyes so dark they swallowed the low light, before his iron control slammed down like a vault door, locking his expression into careful neutrality. "Fuck," she whispered, and she watched his jaw tighten at the sound of her voice. He moved before she could think, turning away with deliberate precision, shrugging out of his suit jacket without looking at her, extending it blindly in her direction. "Take it." His voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. An edge she couldn't name. She stood frozen. Her brain had short-circuited entirely, unable to process the absurdity, the horror, the strange electric charge crackling through her chest that had absolutely no business being there. Sienna. Her name in his mouth sounded different. Almost pained. "Take the jacket." She crossed the space between them on trembling legs. Their fingers brushed as she took the jacket, barely a second of contact, and he pulled back like she'd scorched him. The jacket was warm from his body. It smelled like something expensive and dark that she'd been quietly noticing for years without ever admitting it. "Thank you," she managed. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. He asked why she was in the restricted wing. She gave him half the truth, needed air. The gala was overwhelming. He replied with dry precision that he hadn't expected her to go swimming, least of all without clothes in a corridor that was supposed to be empty. "I miscalculated my exit timing," she shot back, embarrassment making her sharp. Clearly, he said. And then, in the awful, electric silence that followed, she told him. About her father. About Luca. About being arranged like a business merger instead of a human being with opinions about her own life. The temperature in the corridor dropped 20 degrees. Your father is making a mistake, Christian said finally, and there was steel beneath the words. Luca Ferrara is reckless with money, careless with secrets, and far too ambitious for his capabilities. Your father is blinded by shipping routes and not seeing the liability he's inviting in. He sees an alliance, Sienna said tiredly. That's all that matters to him. You matter, Christian said, and the quiet certainty of it hit her like a blow to the chest. She asked him why he cared. He finally turned around. Their eyes met across the 5 feet between them, and she saw it, heat, restraint, and something deeper and darker beneath both. Something that looked, heartbreakingly, like longing. Because, he said, his voice dropping to something intimate and low, you've always mattered to me. Even when you shouldn't have. Even when I swore you wouldn't. He told her about the agreement, their father's arrangement, made before he took power. That she was protected. That protected meant untouchable. That untouchable meant he didn't get to look at her the way he wanted to look at her. Didn't get to think about her the way he constantly thought about her. He had noticed her since the night 5 years ago when she came home from university wearing a red dress, and laughed at something her brother said, and lit up the entire room, and he had known, in that exact moment, that he was completely, irreversibly in trouble. Don't come closer, he warned when she took a step toward him. I'm barely holding on to my control as it is. Maybe I don't want you to have control, she replied, surprising even herself. Maybe I don't have a choice, he countered. He told her to go back to the gala. Smile at the right people. Think carefully about what she actually wanted. Because if she decided she wanted this, he gestured between them with the weight of every unspoken year, there was no going back. He cleared the wing so she could get dressed. Left before she could respond, disappearing down the corridor with that quiet, predatory grace, and she stood there wrapped in his jacket, heart pounding, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd walked into a corridor looking for escape. She'd found something far more dangerous. Open book, the story continues. Sienna got herself together the way Cavalier daughters are trained to, methodically, precisely, with a spare black gown from the emergency wardrobe she kept at her father's house because appearances don't take evenings off. She stood before her mirror and asked the woman looking back whether she looked like someone who'd just been seen naked by a man who'd wanted her for 5 years. Her face was flushed. The steam room, she'd tell anyone who asked. Her hands were shaking. Residual anxiety. Easily explained. The fact that she could still smell Christian's cologne on her skin despite showering, that had no good explanation. Not a single one. Her brother Marco found her within 2 minutes of re-entering the ballroom, which said everything about how well she was hiding it. He appeared at her elbow with that easy, knowing expression she'd spent 25 years failing to outwit, and followed her gaze directly to where Christian stood near the bar, Valentina Russo at his side, tall and radiant and laughing, her hand resting on his arm with the casual confidence of a woman who believed she'd already won something. Something hot and ugly twisted in Sienna's chest. She refused to call it jealousy. You've been half in love with him since you were 20, Marco said, with the same casual tone one might use to mention the weather. Sienna turned so fast she nearly spilled her champagne. I have not. We've all watched you not watch him for 5 years, Marco replied, completely unbothered. It's exhausting. Also very obvious to everyone except Dad, who's too busy arranging your life to notice you're actively dying inside. I'm not dying inside. You had a panic attack and vanished for 40 minutes, Marco said, his voice going softer. You go somewhere with water every single time things get too heavy. You've done it since we were kids. Before she could answer, Luca Ferrara materialized from the crowd, that swagger, that smile that probably worked on women who hadn't watched him casually dismiss the concept of her refusal. He told her to dance with him. Said they should get to know each other before the engagement became official. The engagement isn't official, she said evenly. It will be, he replied, reaching for her hand. She pulled back before he could make contact. Then I'll be the exception to that too. Something flashed in his eyes, irritation poorly disguised as charm. He called her spirited. Said he liked that. Said it would make things more interesting. I'm not a horse to be broken, Sienna said, her voice going cold. And you are not interesting. You're insufferable. Marco shifted beside her, positioning himself between them, but before anything could escalate, a voice cut through the tension with the quiet authority of someone who never needed to raise it. Sienna, your mother is asking for you. Christian had materialized beside them. Silent, precise, devastatingly well-timed. She watched Luca's entire demeanor shift, the aggression retreating behind careful deference, his shoulders losing 3 inches of bravado in the space of a heartbeat. Christian, Luca said, forcing lightness. Didn't see you there. Clearly, Christian replied, flat as stone. He guided Sienna away with his hand hovering just above the small of her back, not touching, maintaining every propriety while all eyes watched. The moment they were out of earshot, she asked him whether her mother was actually looking for her. No, he admitted. But you looked like you were about to say something that would make your father's political situation extremely complicated. I wasn't going to punch him. Your brother was. That's equally problematic. They reached a quieter corner near the garden doors, far enough from the crowd for honesty. She turned to face him properly for the first time since the corridor, and she felt the weight of everything unspoken between them pressing against the surface of his careful control. I don't like the way he looks at you, Christian said. Low. Direct. Like you're something he already owns. Like your refusal is just an obstacle to work around. Welcome to my life, Sienna replied. And then Valentina appeared, slipping her arm through Christian's with that bright, proprietary smile, completely erasing the private moment like it had never existed. She commented on Sienna's dress with a kind of sweetness that might have been genuine or might have been a perfectly aimed needle. Christian shifted seamlessly back into perfect propriety. He gave Valentina his attention. He gave Sienna his regards to pass to her mother. He left. And Sienna stood there watching him go, trying not to notice how easily he walked away. Trying not to feel the particular ache of watching someone touch freely the person you are forbidden to touch at all. That night, at 3 a.m, her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. You looked beautiful tonight. Even in the severe black dress. She knew immediately. She saved the number under family business, innocuous, untraceable, and they talked in the dark, in that liminal space between midnight honesty and morning regret. He told her he couldn't sleep because every time he closed his eyes he saw her in that corridor. She told him they couldn't do this. He said he knew. She told him to stop texting her. He said he was weak. That watching Luca reach for her had made him want to shatter every promise he'd ever made. That he needed her to know she wasn't imagining what lived between them. She asked him if he was enjoying this. No, he replied. I'm suffering through it. But knowing you're suffering too makes it slightly more bearable. That's twisted. Welcome to how I've felt for 5 years. He didn't text again that night. She lay awake for another hour staring at her ceiling, understanding with terrible clarity that she was not going to survive this intact. 3 days later, her father called her into his office. He told her the engagement to Luca Ferrara would be announced in 2 weeks at the Rossi Charity Gala. That it was arranged. That her feelings about Luca were irrelevant. That she was a cavaliere, and it was time she started acting like one. And if I don't? She challenged. He looked at her with those cold eyes, and said, then I'll adjust your attitude for you. She walked out of his office with rage burning in her chest and nearly collided with Christian, who was arriving for a meeting she hadn't known was scheduled. He caught her arm. Asked if she was all right. She said she was fine and tried to move past him, and her voice cracked, just slightly, and he heard it. Of course he heard it. He told her he was there to talk her father out of it. That the Ferrara alliance was bad strategy. That he was going to make Giovanni understand the risk before this went any further. She asked why he would do that. He said it was because someone should fight for what she wanted, even if the rules meant it couldn't be him. She almost told him that the rules were breaking her. Instead, she said, go. I'll be in the garden if it matters. It matters, he said, with a certainty that made something in her chest go very still. Marco found her on the bench by the fountain where she'd been hiding since childhood, brought coffee he knew she needed, and told her gently that Christian had left his meeting early and was walking toward the garden. Then Marco stood up, announced he was making himself scarce, and vanished behind the hedge with the satisfied air of a man who just handed a lit match to a powder keg. 60 seconds later, Christian appeared. Jacket off. Tie loosened. Expression tight with tension and something else, something that looked remarkably like a man who had just made a decision he'd been fighting for 5 years. What we choose. 2 people. 1 garden. 5 years of carefully maintained distance. And a decision that will cost them everything, or give them the only thing that actually matters. This is the part where the story stops pretending. Open book, the story concludes. He looked like a man who had just lost a war he'd spent 5 years winning. Christian stopped a few feet from where she sat on the bench, running a hand through his hair, a rare, unguarded gesture from someone whose composure was usually flawless. He didn't speak immediately. Neither did she. The garden held them both in the quiet particular to old, patient places, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. He's not listening, Christian said finally. I told you he wouldn't, Sienna replied. I presented the strategic argument. Every rational reason why the Ferrara alliance weakens rather than strengthens his position. He heard me out. He paused. And then he told me to focus on my own family's business. She looked up at him. So that's it, then. Not even close, Christian said, and something in his voice made her heart stutter. He sat beside her on the bench. Not in the careful, measured way he usually maintained proximity. Not the professional distance, not the deliberate 6 inches of propriety he always preserved. He sat close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Close enough that the jacket she'd been wrapped in 3 days ago felt like a memory she could almost touch. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to hear it without interrupting, because I'm going to say it exactly once and then we're going to make a decision together. Are you with me? Yes, she said. He told her the truth. Not the strategic version. Not the carefully constructed argument about shipping routes and liability and the Ferrara family's instability. The truth beneath all of that, which he had been guarding with everything he had for 5 years. He told her that the agreement between their fathers had never been about protecting her. It had been about protecting him, because Giovanni Cavalieri had seen what Christian himself hadn't fully admitted yet, which was that Christian Rossi would burn his entire empire to the ground for Sienna Cavalieri if he let himself, and that was a vulnerability neither of their families could afford. He told her that he had kept his word perfectly. Impeccably. Not because it was easy, but because he believed, genuinely believed, that being untouchable meant being safe. That distance was kindness. He told her that watching Luca reach for her had dismantled that belief completely. The thing about protection, Christian said quietly, is that it only works if the person you're protecting agrees to be protected. And you never agreed. I never asked. Sienna felt something inside her go very, very still. What are you asking now? She said. He turned to look at her, really look, without the layers of professional control, without the careful neutrality she'd watched him maintain for half a decade. Just Christian, with his dark eyes full of 5 years of unsaid things. I'm asking whether you want a life chosen for you or a life you fight for. I'm asking whether you're willing to make your father furious and possibly your family complicated and maybe lose some things that are comfortable and familiar, because, he stopped. Steadied himself. Because I'm not comfortable or familiar. And I will never be a safe choice. But I will spend every day making sure you know that you matter. Not for your name. Not for what you can negotiate or what alliances you represent. You. Sienna. The fountain kept its quiet rhythm. Somewhere above them, in the house, her father was probably already planning how to announce her future. If I say yes to this, she said carefully, what does it actually look like? You said there's no going back. There isn't, Christian agreed. It means I go to your father. Not with strategy, with honesty, which will go over about as well as you're imagining. A trace of dry humor in his voice. It means things get difficult before they get better. It means you have to be willing to stand in your own life and claim it. And you, she asked. What does it mean for you? It means I finally stopped pretending, he said simply, that I haven't been yours for 5 years. Sienna was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her father's cold eyes telling her that her feelings were irrelevant. She thought about Luca's hand reaching for hers like permission was an afterthought. She thought about the weight of a life arranged around everyone else's needs, the careful smiling, the practiced graceful retreat, the years of shrinking herself into the shape of what the Cavalieri name required. And she thought about 3 a.m. texts and a jacket that smelled like something she'd been quietly noticing for years. A voice saying her name like it mattered. A man turning away in a corridor because looking at her was more than his control could hold. I want to fight for it, she said. Christian let out a breath, slow, quiet, like he'd been holding it for quite some time. He reached across the small distance between them and took her hand. Not urgently. Not dramatically. With the kind of deliberate, reverent care of someone who had waited long enough to know exactly how to hold something precious. Then we begin, he said. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning, the kind that comes with consequences and complications and conversations nobody was looking forward to having. Giovanni Cavalieri would not go quietly. The families would have opinions. There would be weeks of difficulty ahead, and possibly months of harder things after that. But for the first time in as long as Sienna could remember, she was sitting in her own life, not performing it, not surviving it, actually living it. Christian's hand was warm around hers. The garden was quiet. And somewhere in the house above them, her father was still making plans for a future she had already decided she wasn't going to accept. Some fires, no matter how carefully you guard them, burn anyway. It was time to stop guarding this one. And that, dear friends, is where the Real story begins. Because choosing yourself, especially when the cost is terrifyingly real, is never a single moment. It's 1,000 small decisions made every day afterward. If Sienna and Christian's story moved something in you today, if you felt that pull, that ache, that impossible tension between what you're supposed to want and what you actually want, then this channel was made for you. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. New stories drop every week, and I promise every single one will make you feel something real. Speech balloon, drop a comment below. Are you Team Christian? Or do you think Sienna should have walked away? Tell me where you stand. I read every single one. Red heart # like this video if this story kept you here until the very last word. It genuinely means the world. Loudspeaker, share this with someone who needs a story that reminds them, your wants are not irrelevant. You are not a bargaining chip. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose the fire. Sparkles, the lesson this story carries sparkles. Sienna spent her whole life being told that what she wanted was secondary. That her feelings were an inconvenience. That love was naive and duty was everything. And the most painful part? She had almost started to believe it. The lesson isn't simply follow your heart. It's deeper than that. It's this: the people who love you properly, truly, fully, will never ask you to disappear for the sake of their comfort. They will make space for you. They will say your name like it matters. They will turn away in corridors because looking at you is too much to hold, and they will tell you the truth even when it costs them everything. And you owe it to yourself to recognize the difference between a life that was built around you and a life that was built for you by someone else's blueprint. Protection that silences you is not protection. It is a very beautiful cage. Duty that erases you is not honor. It is control dressed in tradition. And love, Real love, will always find a way to stand in a garden and say, I see you. All of you. And I am choosing you anyway. Choose the fire, friends. Choose the fire. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story. Rose.